All right. Hey, folks, we are in for part 3 of the March Q&A. I am a bespectacled fast today. Do I look like, I don't know, maybe 10 IQ points more intelligent? So I'm at a grand total of 50 now. Okay, so we're going to start with a really good question from Alan Beck. This one caught my eye a while back when he posted it, and it's a really good question. So I'm going to summarize the question because he's written it down as quite a long question, but he's asking quite an important, succinct question. Basically, he wants to know what I think about surrogate markers of growth, such as the pump, soreness, all that kind of stuff. Is the pump and is soreness indicative of growth or of doing something productive? So he cites Mike Israetel, who says is. He cites Jeffrey Verity Schofield, who apparently says it isn't. I haven't cross-checked that, by the way, so I don't know what GVS's stance is on that, but that's what he says. And, let's just talk about it. Okay, right. The pump is certainly, in my opinion, in my experience, very much correlated with growth, and it tells you you're doing something right in the gym. Here's why. And I also want to provide perhaps some kind of explanation for why Mike and GVS maybe have different opinions on this. So, firstly, when I'm managing clients and I'm looking at when to transition from a cut to a bulk or to a maintenance phase or whatever, one of the markers that I look for is pump. And every good bodybuilding coach knows that when you have bulked and bulked and bulked and bulked, at a certain point, you will lose insulin sensitivity. And as a result of that, what tends to happen is your blood glucose levels shoot up, or, well, they're raised. That makes it harder to get a pump because less and less of those resources are in the muscle where they can contribute to a pump. They're just swimming around the bloodstream, which is both unhealthy and also quite bad for bodybuilding. If you look at these interviews with these old bodybuilding coaches, they'll all say that. They don't say it in quite as much scientific detail, but they always say, when you get to a point in the off season, when you're feeling sloppy, you stop getting pumps, you've pushed the weight too far, you've got to pull back, you've got to clean up and get more sensitized to the growth. So the pump tells you a hell of a lot. Yeah, it does. I think to deny that it doesn't reflect what we know is to be true about bodybuilding, what I know to be true about bodybuilding. And I guess my experience comes from having been quite a heavy fat guy and losing that capacity to get pumps, because I did get very heavy when I was powerlifting, and it's not good for you. It's not healthy. So yes, I think the pump is very much correlated to knowing a little bit about how healthy and sensitive you are to growth. Again, another thing, everybody knows in the bodybuilding world that you grow the best out of a cut. Okay, I don't think anyone would deny that. It's one of the reasons why pros tend to grow a hell of a lot, is because they do competition, they grow, competition, they grow. Amateurs maybe compete once a year just to get their pro card. Their growth tends to be steadier unless they implement cutting periods followed by bulking periods. This is one of the reasons why I don't believe in just bulking to oblivion with my clients either. I have specific periods of time where we do bulk cycles, cut cycles, maintenance cycles. Usually, because most people are just regular Joes, usually it's based around life events, like they want to be in shape for a holiday. Okay. But if you are a competitive bodybuilder, you could plan your year out to have specific bulk cut phases where you would rebound out of that. And part of the feedback, the biomarkers you would use is stuff like the pump. That's maybe not a biomarker, but it's certainly a proxy for how sensitive you are to growth. Now, that's what I believe, and that's what I've seen. It's consistent with what I know to be true from my clients. Now, why would GVS disagree? If he does, I hate commenting on this because I've not actually cross-checked to see if he does disagree. But let's say, why would Mike say that he agrees with that? Well, firstly, Mike has been quite fat before. Secondly, he's enhanced. Okay, he's mentioned multiple times he's enhanced. He's not just enhanced, but he also uses things like growth hormone, which has a detrimental effect on insulin resistance. We know that to be true. So as a result, he's going to need to walk that line of insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance. So he's going to be very conscious of losing pumps, because that is an indication to him that he's pushed his growth phase too far. I mean, I hate to bring the whole drug situation into this, but it's just a fact. Okay, love Mike, love what he does, but I don't think you disagree with me really, but it's just all of this stuff still applies to naturals. It's just more exaggerated in enhanced guys. Okay, so if you're a relatively overweight enhanced guy, well, your insulin sensitivity is going to be awful because it's just the way it is. So, going on to why I won't say GVS because I hate quoting him to say if I've not double checked if he said it. But going on to why a natural guy wouldn't really see those issues. Well, quite simply, if a natural guy who's, let's say, has a background in aerobic training, cardiovascularly very fit, it's unlikely they're going to see that for a long time. Like, I think, I mean, let's say this hypothetical natural guy bulks up to 200 pounds. You're not going to be unhealthy at 200 pounds as natural, especially if you have a cardiovascular background. It's not going to happen. So you're just not going to see that drop off in pump, the same as if you were a relatively rotund, love you, Mike, relatively rotund enhanced guy who was training with all the sets and reps which would normally give him a pump. To see that pump drop off, like, okay, something happened. It's a very clear sign. So yes, it's very much correlated to growth. Now, my third point on this is, and I want to make this disclaimer because people get up in arms about this, this is not going to affect the majority of you. Okay. I'm a coach. I deal with a lot of high-level clients, some pretty big guys on the books. And also I do deal with enhanced clients. So these are things that I know because I require to as part of my job, but most of you won't access that world at all. So you have to take some of these things with a grain of salt. I still think Mike's worth listening to. I think he's great. But I think, as a natural, you've got to take a lot of that with a pinch of salt. There are reasons why he leans in certain directions. Like, do you remember when Mike first came onto the scene, really heavily? He was pushing very, very fast weight gains and very hard cuts. Well, there's a reason for that, and he's since pulled back on that advice. There are certain leanings he has which give a clue as to his enhanced status. If you know what to look for. But that's basically the reason, Alan. So yeah, I mean, and I don't think it changes someone. I don't think it changes someone completely physiologically. But my point is, the natural guy is probably not going to see the drop off in pump. So if he's doing a lot of strength training, like powerlifting type training, he might not be bothered about the pump, and that's fine. But the point is, if you are doing a lot of pump, like a style of training which is usually conducive to a pump, and then all of a sudden the pump drops off, usually indicates something's wrong. And if you've deloaded and nothing happens, then yeah, you've pushed the bulk too far. But yeah, great question. Also, there was a follow-up. That was a really good question. I like that. There's a follow-up by Danny. He says Lyle McDonald says that if you're not feeling the targeted muscles, you're not doing the best training for that muscle. For hypertrophy, which kind of aligns with Mike Israel's point of view. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'd agree. Yeah, I think you've got to feel the target muscle. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. I'd also say this. You should feel a strength drop off. So let's say you've done 3 sets of squats and your coach has told you, I want these to be hard sets. And then you go on to the leg press afterwards and you can do the same amount of sets and reps as if you were fresh. Well, you probably didn't work that hard. So yeah, I think you've got to target the muscle and you've got to fatigue the muscle. I think one would have to give me a pretty good argument to say that if you went through 6 sets of quads and you were as fresh as a daisy, as in your quads were fresh as a daisy, then and you'd have to convince me very hard for me to think that you were actually stimulating any growth at that point. So, okay, right, we will move on. But that was a great question. Okay, Jimmy says, this is an interesting question. This is a very particular question. Jimmy says, can you continue to make progress towards physique goals as a more advanced lifter if you're limited to 2 consecutive days per week with a possible third if and when schedule allows? So essentially the question is of training time. How much time do you need to put in to make progress as an advanced lifter? Now, to maintain your physique, you don't need much. So I imagine Jimmy's built a physique. He says he's advanced. So he's built a physique, now he's maintaining it. Maybe there's been a change in work situation. My personal experience with training advanced clients is they need more work. So I think you're going to be hard pressed to improve. I would suggest for the time being that you have a change of circumstances, put your training on the back burner go to maintenance mode, perhaps improve other areas, like improve your diet, maybe get a little bit leaner, improve cardiovascular fitness, and when the circumstances change again, then even things out. Because presumably at some point you had more training time because you got to advanced, and very few people get to advanced training just on the weekend. It's just not something I've seen. If you have, then great. If you're advanced, like bench 3 plates, squat 4, deadlift 5, and you've done it 2 days a week, cool. Then maybe you can progress. But I don't want to tell you that, yeah, you're going to carry on making gains when I don't believe that's the case. So, okay. Danny says, any tips on setting up for a heavy dumbbell overhead press or bench press? I lift at home, no spotter available. Right. The bench is easy. The dumbbell bench is easy. I should do a video explanation for this because it's really easy to get into place. You stand up with the dumbbells, you put them onto your knees, okay, or just above your knees, and then you sit down so the dumbbells are resting on the part of the quad near your knee, the end of your quad. And then as you lean back, your knees come up and you gently put the dumbbells into position. But with your knees, guide the dumbbells up into position. So yeah, you just drop your feet down, carry on benching. Overhead press is a lot more complicated because you don't have that. You can't bring your knees up to your shoulder. It doesn't happen. So overhead press is a lot more complicated. You have to do your best to just kick them up. If you can't do that, I would suggest not doing them. I don't think it's a great idea. Or maybe just do them standing, because then you can clean and press the dumbbells up and just do them standing. Just be sure you are capable of lifting those weights, because 40s for overhead press, it's pretty decent weight. It's pretty good weight. I mean, that would be the equivalent of probably overhead pressing 90 to 100. Are you able to do those actually, or are you doing those by having your arms out like this and using like a partial range of motion? Anyone can do that, but are you actually doing a full range of pull press where you're down like this, press up, you're down? Or are you doing like that weird thing that a lot of UK coaches like to do, which is, I don't think that's very useful. Be honest with yourself if you are actually capable of handling the weight, particularly in overhead press. The dumbbell bench 40s is nothing, but yeah, just guide them up with your legs. Overhead press, maybe find an alternate exercise to do them standing. Right. Okay, so Jonathan, this is a great question. Jonathan's a client of mine. Thoughts on stretch-mediated hypertrophy? How important do you think it is? Do you think exercises where strength curves, where the stretch position is the most difficult, are always the best? Right, that's a really good question. And I want to just clear up a bit about stretch-mediated hypertrophy. I think the point with stretch-mediated hypertrophy is it's not everything, but in an exercise, if you have the ability to take the range of motion through a good stretch, take the muscle through a good stretch, then it's probably going to be more stimulative of growth. So let's take an example. Let's take the bench press as an example. Now, the bench press is not a dumbbell fly, so you can't completely stretch out your chest, but you can stretch your chest more so if you touch your chest with your elbows at a reasonable angle. If you decide to bring your elbows in close and not go all the way down, you're really missing out on a lot of growth. That's more the point, Jonathan. Rather than saying, okay, let's focus on stretch exercises where the emphasis is on stretching the muscles, I think it's more a case of let's pick good compound basic exercises and let's ensure that we move through that with a range of motion so we are getting in a safe stretch position for us. But I'm a big believer. Yeah, I think it's very important. Yeah, very important. So there was some rumblings recently, actually. Greg Nuckols made a point about partial reps, but I think his point was more so that you might do the partials in the stretch position and it might be better. But I don't know. I'd have to watch what he says. If anyone knows about that, pop it in the comments below. But thank you for the question. So yeah, I think it just means whatever exercise you do, if you can stretch the muscle somewhat, aim to stretch it. I mean, the classic example, just to finish off with a couple more examples, the classic example is the bench press and the squat. I think if you're not going deep in the squat, you're going to be very hard pressed to convince anyone you're stimulating the most amount of muscle with the weight you're using. So it's going to be a less than stimulative rep than it would have been if you go all the way down. And as I know from my powerlifting days, the difference between, say, I don't know, the difference of about 5 inches on the squat could be as much as 200 pounds. So the bottom positions are very stimulative. They're very hard. There's something about those deep positions which cause a lot of pain and a lot of growth, and they really humble you in terms of the weight you can use. So you've got to drop quite a lot of weight to the bar to hit those deep positions. There's probably a reason why that is. It's probably because a lot of the growth occurs in those positions, and if you're not trained enough to be able to handle the weight all the way through, you're probably not going to grow that much, or you're probably not that big already. So yeah, okay. All right. Okay, Edit says, hi Faz, once I got to around 60 kilo on the overhead press and 85 kilo bench, I started to get slight wrist pain. So I bought wrist wraps and now no pain. Yeah, that's very normal. So I'm a big fan of wrapping the wrists, because the wrists, unlike your elbow flexors, unlike your knees even, unlike your shoulders, are an area which don't get very much stronger over the course of your training lifetime. Like your knees will get stronger, hips will, shoulders will, even your elbow flexors will, but your wrists don't really get that much stronger. So if you need to wrap your wrists, wrap them. It's not a band-aid solution at all. When I was powerlifting, I would wrap my wrists anytime I went over 3 plates. So yeah, it's just necessary to do it. You don't want your wrist to cock back and get pain. So don't wrap your wrists. I don't think it's a problem with that at all. It's very different to like a belt for deadlifts and squats. There's an argument to be made for wearing a belt for deadlifts and squats, because that musculature, it might hold you back, and you don't want it to hold you back in your squats and deadlifts. So it might hold back your quad development. So wear the belt. There's even more of an argument with the wrist straps, because the wrists just don't get that strong. You can make some kind of argument to say don't wear a belt for squats and deadlifts, but I don't know. I don't think it's the best argument to make. But there's even less of an argument to be made for the wrist straps. Like I think it's well worth wearing them. So, all right. Sam says, with the high rep warm-ups of 25 reps. So, yeah, with my clients, I do sort of a movement-specific warm-up. So if you're going to be bench pressing, for example, I might have you doing 3 or 4 sets of flat dumbbell benches. A lot of coaches do that these days. Matt Wenning is given the credit for that, but I think a lot of coaches do that. But Sam was saying, when do you go up in weight? There's no real need. You don't have to go up in weight. It's not supposed to be a progressive resistance exercise. It's just supposed to get the blood in the muscle. It's kind of like the over warm-up. The over warm-up is just there to keep you in touch with the 1 rep max. It's not there as a progressive single every week, every session. So it's just enough to keep the blood in there. Overload the exercises. Over time, they'll go up, sure, but that's if you get a lot stronger. Okay. All right. With regards to squat depth, what is deep, below parallel, or astergrass? Same question. Same from Sam again. I think whatever you can do comfortably is probably important. We give arbitrary standards like parallel or astergrass, but it depends very much on the way you're built. I think the deeper the better until your back starts to round. I think as a general rule, though, and I think most people would agree with me, if you're way above parallel, then it's probably a flexibility issue, some kind of inhibition that needs to be fixed. And if you fix it, you'll get more growth for less weight, which is a win. But they're still all very arbitrary standards. Just try to go as low as you can without letting your back round. All right, so Mickey says, you mentioned you used to chin up as one of your main lifts in your training. Why would you prioritize a vertical pull instead of a horizontal pull? Isn't a row movement close to a deadlift in terms of muscle recruitment, and hence powerlifter should put emphasis on row instead of vertical pull? Thanks. Yeah, it's a good question, Mickey. So I guess what Mickey is talking about is what makes the best assistance exercises for a muscle group, right? Which is a good question. So now my goal with an assistance exercise is to provide work in a similar movement pattern to the muscles involved in the lift. Now, with regards to upper back work benefits all 3 lifts. So upper back work is one of those areas which is ubiquitous for all of powerlifting. Upper back helps your deadlift, helps your squat, it helps your bench press, helps all the lifts. So the upper back is a very special area for strength athletes. And any strength athlete or coach worth his salt will work the hell out of the upper back. You can work it frequently from all kinds of different angles. You have pull-ups, pull-downs, you have various rows, you have pullovers, shrugs, tons of variations. all things that you can do. And if you do it right, you can program upper back work pretty much every day, which is what I used to do. I would do shrug type movements on my squat and deadlift days, usually rearward shrugs. And I would do chins and rows on my upper body days. And I would power my upper back every single day, training day. So yeah, I think with the chin up and rows, rather than think of them as direct assistance exercises, think of them as building your upper back, which enhances all three. Now, you might have a point if you were discussing squat. Like you might say, well, Faz, why are you doing leg press rather than a front squat or something like that? Maybe there's an argument to be made there. Although I will say the leg press was very good for me when I was a powerlifter too. But I think it's a case of the upper back is just a special area which benefits all three. So just getting it thicker and bigger is going to help all the lifts. So I'm not married to any one lift in that regard. It's just a case of, and neither should you be. If you are a strength athlete or anyone really, build the hell out of your upper back and choose from those 4 variations. So go from some kind of pull down chin type of thing, row, also some type of pullover, whether that's cable or dumbbell, or ideally machine, where you get a big stretch and you can contract as well. Great exercise. And also various types of shrugs, not just upward shrugs, but rearward shrugs are fantastic. Rearward shrugs are highly underrated. I made an entire video on rearward shrugs. If you can work the upper back without being limited by the arm flexors, it's a win. You can generally use more weight, but eventually you'll be able to use more weight. And that is a far better exercise than a face pull, which is, I think you're very limited. I said this in a video once, at least in comments, and I don't think it went down very well with the person who was asking, but a face pull is pretty much just for weak people, because if you're doing a face pull and you're assuming you're standing on a cable machine, eventually, pretty soon, you're going to be limited by how much your body can counterbalance the weight. So there's no real point, unless you're doing face pulls, say, on a bench, on an incline bench with a barbell. That's different. That's great. That's a good exercise. But a cable face pull where you're just standing facing a rack is probably one of the worst exercises you can do, because you're so limited by how much weight you can just stand up against. The leverages are awful. It's just something that weak people do. I think shrugs, chins, rows, and pullovers far better overall. So that should be the bulk of your upper back training. All right. Okay, so let's go for the next question. Jake says, is the 3-4-5 plate standards, is the 4-plate squat and 5-plate deadlift 1 rep maxes with the belt straps rule? Jake, I think you're getting a bit far into this. We're not looking to demonstrate powerlifting competence in a competition. What I'm saying is, and these are not my standards, these are simply the standards which would reflect a good level of development. By the time you get about to the area where you are roughly benching 3 plates, squatting 4, deadlift 5, around about that ballpark, you look at yourself in the mirror and go, I look like a lifter. That's the point, Jake, okay? There's that, but there's also the point that people shouldn't lowball their standards. So try and get in that ballpark. When you're handling those kind of weights competently, whether it's for 1 rep or for 5, you will have a physique you can be proud of. That's the point. The gap between a 3-plate bench and a 2-plate bench is vast. The gap between a 4-plate squat, a genuine 4-plate deep squat versus a 3-plate squat is vast. And it's filled in with a lot of small muscle gains along the way. So I think people really get hung up on that question. They really want the details. You're going about it the wrong way. Just getting in that ballpark is going to get you more muscular. So we'll move on from there. Okay, so Victor says, what are your Faz, what are your opinions on the reverse pyramid? It's very intense. I'll say that, because it's basically a top set and then a back off set and then a further back off set after that. And in general, the reverse pyramid, you're trying to go to either failure or beyond. It's certainly a scheme which is very focused on progressive overload as the main tool to push growth. So you're adding weight to the bar every week or adding reps. So to that end, it's very, very performance-based, which means you will be flirting with failure quite a lot. So it's an extremely intense routine, which means you typically can't do much volume. Now, I think that depends on what your stance is and what you respond best to. I think most people would respond better to a little bit more volume. I mean, unless you're just doing reverse pyramid and sandbagging your sets, but I don't think that's really the intention. I think most people do better with a little bit more volume. And we get into those conversations again about how to track intensity. My personal feeling is that most people can get away with about 10 to 20 sets per week as long as they're not training all the way to failure. Now, you say that to people, they'll tell you they're training to failure and they're doing 20 sets per body part. You're like, something doesn't quite work out there, because everybody likes to, everybody likes to say they're training to failure on the internet. But yeah, I think reverse pyramid is fine. It does lend itself to probably a fairly low volume routine, and that might not be optimal for growth for you as an individual. I think to prosper from very low volume routines, you have to be a very gifted lifter. Contrary to what sort of the hard gainer people say, the most gifted people respond well to the least volume, right? Because they're able to exert so much stress onto the muscle in that one or two or few sets that they grow. I would love it if I could grow with only 3 or 4 sets per body part per week. I'd love it. Fantastic. Unfortunately, I must do more work, and I think that's sort of where the hard gainer crowd go wrong. There's quite a large body of evidence to suggest now that the worse you are at something, the more volume you need to do. It's like this. My calves are massive, basically. I wasn't gifted with much in terms of physique, but I think the areas which strike your physique as making it look very aesthetic, like forearms, calves, and traps, somehow I got blessed with ridiculously good forearms, calves, and traps, right? Now, I don't need to do much on those to keep them growing. I don't need to do much at all. My traps just blow up no matter what. Same with my forearms, same with my calves. They always have. It's the areas where I'm weakest at, like my biceps, I have to do a ton of volume to get them to move. It's just the way it is. There's no activity in life, really, where you do less to get more. Potentially, maybe just, I don't know, chasing girls. But anyway, so yeah. I think most people need more volume than what reverse pyramid generally alludes to. All right. Daniel Edwards says, we'll take one last question. Daniel Edwards says, what are your thoughts on Cialis as an alternative to expensive non-stim pre-workouts? Okay, so it sounds like an unusual question, but it's actually a very good question. So it's all to do with nitric oxide. Now, there are things on the market like arginine and all that kind of stuff, which are touted as non-stim pre-workouts. Basically, they're vasodilators. They dilate your blood vessels, causing increased blood flow, better pumps, all that kind of stuff. That's generally considered to be positive for growth because better pumps, more blood flow, more nutrients, blah, blah, blah. Also, it looks cool, lots of veins. Cialis actually directly increases the production of nitric oxide. Nitric oxide. So they both work in tandem. You've got Cialis increases nitric oxide, L-arginine and all that crap. There's like 3 or 4 of them. They expand the blood vessels as a consequence of more nitric oxide. So they're kind of like 2 sides of the same coin. You could use both together if you really want to get a good pump, I guess. But it sounds like an unusual question, but it's not. It's often used as a pre-workout. Would I recommend it though? Is probably not. I don't know. It seems to be well tolerated, but originally it was a blood pressure medication. For that reason, nitric oxide reduces blood pressure. I don't know. I mean, I need to look into it more. I don't know much about Cialis because your boys never needed it. You know what I mean? So, but I think on a serious note, I would say, like any chemical compound, I would probably look at contraindications, side effects before I even considered using it because I don't know. It just seems a bit exotic. All right, we're going to call it there, and I am going to leave the subscription option open, but only for those who take Cialis as a pre-workout. So take care. See you next time.